They said I only wore the uniform for attention, that I'd never seen real combat, that discipline was just a word on paper. But that day, under the Florida sun, when the SEALs lined up and one of them saluted me before the entire crowd, my parents finally learned what silence had been hiding all along. The laughter died in their throats. The mockery turned to stone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to say a word to prove who I really was. My name is Lena Harper, and I've learned that the worst wounds don't come from enemy fire. They come from the people who are supposed to have your back. The Florida heat pressed down on my father's backyard like a wet blanket that Saturday afternoon, thick with humidity and the smell of grilling meat. Relatives clustered around coolers of beer, their laughter sharp as broken glass against my eardrums. I sat at the picnic table's far end, my fingers wrapped around a sweating beer can I didn't want to drink, watching my brother Blake hold court near the grill. "So there I was," Blake boomed, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd rehearsed this story 100 times. "Teaching these corporate executives what real military discipline means. You should have seen their faces when I put them through Navy SEAL training drills." The crowd ate it up. My cousin Mark whistled appreciatively. "Man, that's hardcore." Blake had never made it past week 3 of basic training. The medical discharge papers said stress fracture, but I knew the truth he'd quit. Now he ran a fitness company called Warrior Mindset Training, selling watered-down military exercises to desk jockeys who wanted to feel tough for an hour. Unlike some people, Blake's eyes found mine across the yard, his grin sharp as a knife. "Who thinks sitting behind a desk in uniform makes them a warrior?" The relatives chuckled. Someone, I think it was Aunt Carol, actually snorted. "Come on, Lena," Blake continued, emboldened by the audience. "Tell everyone about your exciting paper-pushing adventures. What was it today? Filing reports, organizing supply requests." "Something like that," I said quietly, my voice barely carrying over the sizzle of burgers on the grill. My father, Colonel Richard Harper, retired after 30 years of distinguished service with the SEALs, didn't even look up from his beer. His silence was louder than Blake's mockery. In his world, real soldiers had stories worth telling. Real soldiers came home with visible scars and medals that weren't classified. Real soldiers were sons, not daughters who flew missions nobody could talk about. "Paper Captain," Blake laughed, and the nickname stung worse than shrapnel. "That's what we should call her, Captain Paperwork." My mother emerged from the house carrying a fresh pitcher of sweet tea, her smile bright and practiced. "Blake, honey, tell them about your new contract with that tech company. 6 figures for team-building exercises." The conversation shifted to Blake's business success, his expanding client base, his plans to franchise. I became invisible again, just another relative at the table, my dress whites from this morning's ceremony folded carefully in my car, the new ribbons nobody would ask about still in their box. I forced myself to smile, to nod at the right moments, to play the role they'd cast me in years ago. The quiet one, the one who went into the Navy for the college money, the one who probably spent her days doing administrative work while real warriors like Dad and his buddies from the teams did the actual fighting. The beer can crumpled slightly in my grip. 3 weeks ago, I'd pulled 2 Marines from a burning helicopter while under heavy fire. The week before that, I'd flown a medical evacuation through a sandstorm so thick I couldn't see my own rotors, guided only by instruments and instinct. My squadron called me Revenant 2 because I'd brought crews back from missions everyone thought were suicide runs. But those stories were classified. The missions didn't exist. The medals were presented in closed ceremonies. The scars were hidden beneath my shirt burns along my ribs from when shrapnel had torn through my cockpit 6 months ago. "You okay, sis?" Blake called out, false concern dripping from his voice. "You look a little tense. Must be all that stress from pushing papers." More laughter. Even my teenage cousin joined in. I stood slowly, setting down the crushed beer can. "I need some air." "But you're already outside," Blake quipped, earning another round of chuckles. I walked past them all, past the grill where my father stood like a monument to everything I'd never be in his eyes. past my mother, who was already telling another story about Blake's accomplishments. I headed toward the edge of the property where the lawn met the seagrass, where I could see the ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Out there, beyond the breakers, jets from the Naval Air Station occasionally roared past, the sound used to mean freedom, purpose, belonging to something greater than myself. Now it just reminded me of the gulf between who I was and who my family thought I was. The salt wind caught my hair, and I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. Behind me, Blake's voice carried on the breeze. She probably couldn't handle my beginner's workout, let alone real military training. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years under the weight of their dismissal, finally snapped. I wouldn't let them define me anymore. I wouldn't let their ignorance be my truth. They wanted to believe I was nothing more than a paper captain fine. But one day soon, they would learn exactly what kind of warrior they'd been mocking all these years. I turned back toward the house, and for the first time in years, I wasn't smiling. The revenge would be patient, calculated, and devastating, just like every mission I'd ever flown. They just didn't know it yet. The Harper family legacy was built on blood and sand, or at least that's how my father told it. Every wall in our childhood home bore witness to his glory-framed photographs of SEAL teams, challenge coins in glass cases, a folded flag from some classified operation that he'd hint at but never fully explain. Growing up in that house meant growing up in his shadow. And shadows, I learned, could suffocate you. I was 12 when I first understood what the name Harper meant in military circles. Dad had brought home 3 of his former teammates for dinner, and I'd sat at the top of the stairs, listening to their war stories echo through bourbon and laughter. They spoke in code about places they couldn't name, missions that didn't exist, brothers who came home in boxes draped with flags. "Your boy's got the look," one of them had said about Blake. "Bet he'll follow your footsteps right into the teams." "Damn right," my father had replied, pride thick in his voice. "Kid's already doing 200 push-ups a day. Says he wants to be better than his old man." Nobody mentioned me, the straight-A student, the one who could run 5 miles without breaking a sweat, the one who'd been studying military history while Blake was playing video games. Blake lasted 18 days in basic training. The official story was a stress fracture in his left foot, a medical discharge. No fault of his own. But I'd been there the day he came home. I saw the relief in his eyes, the way his hands stopped shaking once he was back in his childhood bedroom. He'd called our father from the medical center, voice cracking, "I can't do this. Dad, I'm not like you." My father rewrote that story within a week. Blake became the son who'd been too aggressive in training, who'd pushed himself beyond human limits. The stress fracture became a badge of honor, proof that Blake had the warrior spirit even if his body couldn't keep up. By the time Blake started his fitness company, he'd convinced himself the lie was true. Military discipline for civilian success. His business cards read. He'd never mentioned that his military experience consisted of 2.5 weeks of getting screamed at by drill instructors before quitting. I joined the Navy a year later. No fanfare, no family send-off. Just a quiet drive to the recruitment office while everyone was at Blake's grand opening for his gym. Why the Navy, the recruiter had asked. "I want to fly," I'd answered. What I didn't say was I want to fly so far from here that my father's shadow can't reach me. Flight school was hell. The academic workload alone washed out 30% of my class. The physical requirements eliminated another 20%. The psychological pressure, the knowledge that one mistake at Mach 2 meant death, broke the rest. I graduated 3rd in my class, the only woman in the top 10. My father didn't come to my winging ceremony. Blake had a fitness competition that day. 3 years into my service, I was assigned to a squadron that didn't officially exist, flying missions that would never be acknowledged. The first time I landed a damaged helicopter on a carrier deck during a storm, my commanding officer said I had steel in my spine and ice in my veins. The first time I took enemy fire, I thought about calling home. Then I remembered the last family dinner I'd attended before deployment. Blake had spent an hour describing his military-inspired workout routine while my father nodded approvingly. When someone finally asked about my upcoming deployment, my father had waved it off. "She's doing transport runs. Safe stuff. Not like real combat operations." Transport runs. That's what he called flying special operations teams in and out of hot zones. I stopped calling home after that. The missions accumulated like scars. A night extraction under heavy fire in a country we weren't supposed to be in. A medical evacuation through a mountain pass with RPGs exploding around us. The time I held my co-pilot's intestines inside his body for 40 minutes while flying with one hand, landed the bird, and saved his life. They gave me a medal for that one in a room with no windows. Told me I could never speak of it. My squadron started calling me Revenant 2 after I brought back a helicopter that should have been unflyable hydraulics shot out. Half the tail rotor gone. Fuel leaking from 17 bullet holes. The maintenance chief said it was impossible. I told him impossible was just another word for Tuesday. But at home, I was still just Lena, the quiet one, the one who'd joined the Navy for the benefits. Paper captain. The worst part was that my father knew. He had to know. He still had connections, still got the newsletters, still heard the whispers from active duty SEALs about the Navy pilot who'd pulled their asses out of the fire more than once. But acknowledging me meant acknowledging that his daughter had become what his son couldn't. So he chose silence. And in that silence, Blake's voice grew louder, his manufactured military persona more elaborate, his mockery of my desk job more cutting. The family swallowed the myth whole. Blake, the warrior who'd been too tough for the military. Lena, the administrator playing dress-up in uniform. I learned to live with it the way you learn to live with chronic pain, a constant ache that flares up at family gatherings. Sharp enough to steal your breath, but never quite enough to kill you. But pain, I'd learned in combat, could be transformed into something else. Something harder, something patient, something that knew how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The old SEAL arrived at my parents' 4th of July celebration like a ghost from my father's past. Commander Mason Hale, silver-haired and straight-backed despite his 70 years, walked through the backyard gate carrying a 6-pack of beer and 30 years of shared history with my father. I was standing by the cooler, trying to remain invisible as usual, when his eyes found me. Something flickered across his weathered face recognition, but not the social kind. The kind that comes from seeing a face in classified briefings. Richard. He called out to my father, but his eyes never left mine. "Good to see you, brother." The two men embraced, slapping backs with the force that old warriors use to say everything words can't. My father led him around, introducing him to relatives who'd heard the stories Mason Hale, the legend who'd served 3 tours in Vietnam before joining the SEALs, who'd run operations in places that didn't exist on maps. When they reached me, my father's introduction was perfunctory. "This is my daughter, Lena. She's in the Navy, too. Administrative work." Mason's handshake was firm, his palm calloused. "Administrative work," he repeated slowly, studying my face. Then, quieter, almost to himself. "Revenant 2. The words hit me like ice water. My spine straightened involuntarily. "What was that?" my father asked, frowning. Mason's eyes narrowed, still locked on mine. "Shh, you were Revenant 2, weren't you? That op over the Red Sea, 2019. The one where—" "I think you're confused." My father interrupted, his laugh forced. "Lena works in logistics, supply chains, that sort of thing." "No," Mason said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "I saw the after-action report. The pilot who flew through that SAM site, pulled out Echo Team when their Black Hawk went down, lost half her aircraft's functionality and still made it to the carrier. That was you." The backyard had gone quiet. Blake materialized beside us, beer in hand, sensing drama like blood in the water. "Dad," Blake laughed, that sharp, mocking sound I'd grown to hate. She probably just watched that on TV. You know how these war movies get everyone confused. Right. Lena saw it on Netflix and wished it was you. Mason's face darkened. He looked between Blake and my father, then back to me. The report said the pilot took shrapnel to the torso. Still flying when the corpsman found her, blood pooling in her seat. His voice dropped. Show them your ribs, left side. The scar pattern from Syrian shrapnel is distinctive. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. My father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. This is ridiculous, Blake scoffed. My sister's a paper pusher. She probably got that scar falling off a ladder in some supply warehouse. Mason's expression shifted to something dangerous. Your sister saved 12 SEALs that night. My godson was one of them. Tommy Martinez, you remember him. Richard. Your sister flew into hell to pull him out. My father's face had gone pale. That's not possible. Not possible. Mason's voice rose. Or not convenient, because I've seen her name on 5 different operations reports in the last 2 years. Always redacted, always classified. But the pilots talk. They know who Revenant 2 is. Look! Blake stepped forward, his fitness trainer bravado on full display. I don't know what game you're playing, old man, but game. Mason turned on him, and suddenly the 70-year-old man looked capable of violence. Your sister has more confirmed combat hours than half the active duty SEALs I know. She's been shot down twice and flew herself out both times. She has a distinguished flying cross that's so classified they can't even display it. My mother had appeared, sweet tea pitcher forgotten in her hands. Richard, what's he talking about? My father's silence was deafening. I watched him wrestle with the truth, saw the moment he chose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable reality. Mason's getting confused. The stress of retirement, maybe early dementia. Don't you dare, Mason growled. Don't you dare diminish what she's done to protect your ego. She's never mentioned any of this, my father said weakly. Because it's classified, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. It was the first time I'd spoken since Mason arrived. Because you never asked. Because every time I tried to tell you anything about my service, you changed the subject to Blake's gym. Blake laughed nervously. Come on, this is insane. If you were some war hero, why keep it secret? I don't keep it secret, I replied, meeting his eyes. I follow orders. There's a difference between can't tell and won't listen. Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, flipping it to me with practiced ease. I caught it one-handed muscle memory from 100 similar exchanges. On one side, the SEAL trident. On the other, an inscription, for those who fly through hell so we can walk out. That's from Echo Team, Mason said, loud enough for everyone to hear. They had it made specifically for the pilot who saved their asses. Your pilot. Your daughter. My father stared at the coin in my hand like it was a live grenade. The careful mythology he'd built around Blake, around himself, around what constituted real military service, it was crumbling in real time. This is bullshit, Blake muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Mason turned to leave, then paused. You know what the real shame is, Richard. You had a hero under your roof this whole time, and you were too proud to see her. He walked away, leaving us in a silence so complete I could hear the ocean waves beyond the property line. My family stood frozen, processing what they'd just heard, trying to reconcile the paper captain they'd mocked with the warrior Mason had described. My father's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came. Blake had stepped back, his face flushed with something that might have been shame or anger or both. I pocketed the coin and turned toward the house. I need to make a call, I said. Classified. It was a lie. But for the first time, I didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. Let them choke on the possibility that everything they believed about me was wrong. The seed of truth had been planted. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. 3 weeks after Mason's revelation, I returned home on leave to find nothing had changed. The family had collectively decided to forget the 4th of July incident, filing it away with other uncomfortable truths like Blake's basic training failure and my father's drinking problem. Denial, I'd learned, was the Harper family's strongest tradition. The occasion this time was Blake's newest venture, a veteran fitness challenge he'd organized in the backyard, complete with the obstacle course made from Home Depot lumber and rope. He'd been selling tickets for $50 each, promising donors that proceeds would go to support real American warriors. I knew for a fact the money was going straight into his business account. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as I sat at the same picnic table, watching Blake demonstrate his military-grade training techniques to a crowd of suburban dads and CrossFit enthusiasts. He wore camouflage pants and a black tank top with warrior mindset printed across the chest, dog tags bouncing against his chest as he moved, dog tags he'd bought online, never earned. Mental toughness, Blake shouted, doing pull-ups on a bar he'd installed between two trees, is what separates warriors from civilians. It's what separated me from the guys who couldn't hack it in BASIC. I noticed his hands shaking when he dropped from the bar, the tremor he tried to hide by immediately grabbing a water bottle. 10 pull-ups and he was winded. I'd done 50 that morning in my hotel room, along with 200 push-ups and a 5-mile run. Standard maintenance, nothing special. My mother circulated through the crowd with her practiced hostess smile, collecting checks and gushing about Blake's dedication to helping veterans. He could have been a SEAL like his father, I heard her tell someone, but his body betrayed him. His spirit, though pure warrior. Lena, Blake's voice cut through my thoughts. Why don't you come try the course, show everyone how the Navy stays fit? The crowd turned to look at me. Some laughed, already in on the joke. The Harper daughter who played soldier. The desk jockey in dress whites. I'm good, I said evenly. Come on, Blake pressed, scenting blood. Or would this be too tough after all that paperwork, I mean? I designed this course based on real SEAL training. Might be a bit much for someone who's never seen actual combat. My father, standing by the grill, said nothing. His silence was permission, endorsement, encouragement for Blake to continue. Actually, I said, standing slowly, I'm recovering from a shoulder injury. It wasn't a lie. 3 weeks ago, I dislocated it during a crash landing in a desert I couldn't name, in a country we weren't supposed to be in. The medic had popped it back in while I bit down on a leather strap. Then I'd flown 4 more hours to get my team home. Shoulder injury. Blake laughed. From what reaching for files on a high shelf? The crowd chuckled. My mother joined in, adding, Blake, be nice to your sister. Not everyone has your pain tolerance. I watched Blake bask in the attention, his chest puffed out, that familiar sneer playing at his lips. He'd built his entire identity on a lie, and my family had mortgaged their reality to maintain it. You know what, I said, my voice carrying across the yard. You're right, Blake. He blinked, surprised by the admission. You'd never make it through my training. I continued, walking closer to him. Because my training involves actual combat, real bullets, real blood, real consequences. His face flushed red. Listen, just because that old man told some war stories 2 nights ago, I interrupted, my voice calm and steady. I flew a rescue mission through an ambush, took 17 rounds to my aircraft. My co-pilot lost 3 fingers to shrapnel. I flew us home with 1 engine on fire and hydraulic fluid spraying in my face. The backyard had gone silent. But please, I gestured to his obstacle course. Tell me more about your rope climbing. I'm sure it's very challenging. Blake's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. You're lying. Dad, tell them she's lying. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. But still, he said nothing. You want to know the difference between us. Blake, I asked, stepping close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath. You failed at becoming a warrior, so you pretend to be one. I became one, and pretend I'm not. Bullshit, he spat, but his voice cracked. You're nobody. You're nothing. Just a what? I asked quietly. Say it. Tell everyone what you really think of me. His hands were shaking harder now, that tremor he could never quite control when his adrenaline spiked. The crowd watched, uncomfortable, sensing the family dynamics shifting like tectonic plates. You'd never make it through my program, he said weakly, falling back on his standard insult. I laughed, short and sharp. Blake, I've been shot down twice, crashed 3 times, and flew myself to safety every single time. I've pulled grown men from burning wreckage while under enemy fire. I have burns on my ribs, shrapnel scars on my back, and a knee that predicts weather changes because I shattered it during a hard landing and still flew 6 more hours to get my team home. I looked around at the stunned faces neighbors who'd known me since childhood, relatives who'd heard Blake's stories for years, my mother whose perfect hostess smile had finally cracked. Your program, I said, turning back to Blake. Your program is a fantasy sold to people who want to play soldier for an hour. You wouldn't last 10 minutes in mine. That night, alone in my hotel room, I pulled out a notebook and wrote 2 words on the first page, Revenant Returns. Below it, I sketched out a plan, not for revenge. Exactly. Revenge implied emotion, anger, hatred. This was something colder, more precise. This was about truth, delivered with surgical precision at exactly the right moment. I made a call to Mason Hale, then another to my commanding officer, then a third to someone whose name I couldn't write down, whose title didn't officially exist. The ceremony was in 3 weeks. My father would be there, honored for his years of service. Blake would be in the audience, playing the role of the devoted military son. They just didn't know I'd be on stage. The truth was coming, and it would arrive with all the force of a helicopter rotor cutting through desert air, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny, impossible to forget. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing flight logs in my quarters, official Department of Defense letterhead, classification stamps, and a simple message. Your presence is requested at the Naval Air Station Recognition Ceremony, November 15th. Formal dress whites. Further details to follow. What followed, in a separate encrypted message, made me sit down hard on my bunk. The Distinguished Flying Cross, for actions during Operation Revenant, the same mission Mason had mentioned, the one that didn't exist in any public record. They were going to announce it, publicly. At the same ceremony where my father would receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the SEAL Veterans Association. I called Mason immediately. It's about time. His gravelly voice came through the phone. I may have made some calls, pulled some strings. Your CO was more than happy to support it once I explained the situation. Mason, this isn't necessary. The hell it isn't. He cut me off. I've watched Richard parade that son of his around for years, letting him steal valor he never earned while you sat silent. It ends now. My father will. Your father will stand there and watch his daughter receive one of the highest honors in military aviation, and if he has a problem with it, he can take it up with me and the 12 SEALs you saved that night. Over the next 2 weeks, I made my preparations quietly. I had my dress whites pressed, my ribbons arranged, the new medal that arrived via secure courier hidden in my safe. I told no one in my family I'd be attending, let alone receiving an award. Meanwhile, my father sent daily family group texts about the upcoming ceremony, photos of his old uniform, updates on who from his former team would attend, reminders that this was a proud day for the Harper family legacy. Blake chimed in constantly, promising to live stream it for his fitness company's social media, talking about how proud he was of the family tradition of service. 3 days before the ceremony, my mother called. Lena, honey, are you coming to your father's award ceremony? I'll be there, I said carefully. Oh, good, Blake's saving seats in the front row. He wants to get good footage for his promotional video about military families. Promotional video? For his company. Warrior Mindset, a legacy of service. He's featuring your father's career and his own. Journey. His journey. 3 weeks of basic training had become a journey. Make sure you wear something nice, she added. Blake says the cameras add 10 pounds. I'll wear my uniform. She paused. Oh, well, just the regular one. Dear, this is your Father's Day. We wouldn't want to, you know. Wouldn't want to what? Mom. Distract from the real veterans being honored. I hung up without saying goodbye. The night before the ceremony, I sat in my hotel room, the Distinguished Flying Cross in its presentation box on the bed beside me. My phone buzzed with another family group text from Blake. Can't wait for tomorrow, Dad. You're going to make us all so proud. The Harper men have always been warriors. The Harper men. I typed out a dozen responses, deleted them all. Tomorrow would say everything that needed to be said. Mason called around 9 p. You ready for this? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should just skip it. Let them have their day. Lena. His voice was firm. You've spent your entire career in the shadows. Classified missions, redacted reports, medals you can't wear in public. Tomorrow, for once, you get to stand in the light. You've earned it. It feels like revenge. No, he said. Revenge would be exposing Blake's lies to his clients. Revenge would be leaking your father's dismissive comments to his SEAL buddies. This is just truth. Simple, undeniable truth. That night, I dreamed of flying. Not the nightmare flights through fire and flak, but the pure joy of lifting off, of leaving the ground and all its weight behind. In the dream, I could see my family below, growing smaller and smaller until they were just specks, their voices lost in the roar of rotors. The morning of November 15th dawned bright and clear. Perfect flying weather. We called it. I put on my dress whites with practiced precision, every ribbon aligned, every medal polished. The Distinguished Flying Cross would be presented during the ceremony, but I wore my other decorations, the ones that had been quietly pinned on in windowless rooms, witnessed by people whose names I couldn't speak. My phone exploded with texts from Blake. Already here. Front row center, Dad. You better be ready for your close-up. This is going to be epic for the brand. I drove to the Naval Air Station in silence, my service cover on the seat beside me, the California sun warming the car. At the gate, the guard scanned my ID, then did a double take at my ribbon rack. Ma'am, he said, snapping a salute that was crisper than required. Welcome home. Home. Such a strange word for someone who'd found it only in the cockpit, 30,000 feet above a world that never quite fit. I parked in the back lot, away from the gathering crowd. Through the windshield, I could see the stage being set up, the chairs in neat rows, the podium with the official seal. In 3 hours, everything would change. My phone rang. My father. Lena, where are you? The ceremony starts soon. I'm here. Well, hurry up. Blake saved you a seat. And Lena. He paused. Try not to make this about you. Today is important for the family name. Yes, sir, I said. The words automatic, trained. I understand completely what today means for the family name. He hung up, satisfied that I knew my place. I sat in the car for another minute, breathing steadily, the weight of what was coming settling on my shoulders like a flight vest. Then I picked up my cover, checked my appearance in the mirror one last time, and stepped out into the sunshine. Time to return from the dead. Time for Revenant 2 to finally come home. The morning sun blazed off the Pacific, turning the ceremony grounds into a field of white uniforms and gleaming medals. 500 people had gathered on the parade grounds of Naval Air Station North Island, rows of chairs arranged with military precision facing a stage draped in red, white, and blue bunting. I stood at the back, behind the seated crowd, watching my family in the front row. Blake had his phone out, already filming, narrating in a low voice about military excellence and the warrior tradition. My mother sat beside him, her Sunday best dress perfectly pressed, her hands folded in her lap. My father, in his dress blues with 3 decades of ribbons, sat ramrod straight, the picture of military bearing. They hadn't seen me yet. The ceremony began with the usual formalities: national anthem, invocation, introductory remarks from the base commander. I watched my father's face as they began calling the honorees for various service awards. His jaw was set with pride, ready for his moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the admiral at the podium announced, "before we present our Lifetime Achievement Awards, we have a special recognition to make." This wasn't on the program my father had memorized. Sometimes, acts of valor occur in shadows, in places we cannot name, in operations that don't officially exist. Today, we have the rare privilege of bringing one such act into the light. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Blake lowered his phone, confused. My father's brow furrowed. On September 14th, 2019, a naval aviator flew an MH-60R Seahawk through one of the most intense surface-to-air missile barrages seen since Vietnam. The mission extract a SEAL team pinned down after their Black Hawk was destroyed. The pilot took 17 rounds to her aircraft, suffered shrapnel wounds to her torso, and lost 60% of her hydraulic systems. My mother's hand went to her throat. Blake had gone completely still. Despite these conditions, she successfully extracted all 12 team members and flew them to safety, maintaining consciousness despite blood loss that would have incapacitated most people. Her actions that night saved 12 American lives. The admiral paused, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Lieutenant Commander Lena Harper, please come forward." The silence was absolute. I stepped out from behind the crowd and began walking down the center aisle, my footsteps the only sound on the parade ground. Every head turned, phones came out, whispers started. Blake's beer belly of a face had gone pale. His phone hung limp in his hand, still recording but forgotten. My mother's perfect composure cracked, her mouth opening in shock. And my father. My father looked like he'd been shot. I climbed the steps to the stage, saluted the admiral, and stood at attention. "So, Lieutenant Commander Harper," the admiral continued, reading from the citation, "for extraordinary heroism while serving as pilot in command of Revenant 2 during combat operations in hostile territory. Despite overwhelming enemy fire and severe personal injury, Lieutenant Commander Harper displayed exceptional courage and airmanship in successfully completing one of the most dangerous rescue missions in recent naval aviation history." From the front row, Blake's voice carried on the wind, "Dad." My father silenced him with a gesture, but his eyes never left me. "The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant Commander Lena Harper, United States Navy." The medal was heavy in the admiral's hands as he pinned it to my uniform. The photographer's camera clicked repeatedly. The crowd had begun to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunder. That's when Commander Mason Hale stood up in the third row. The old SEAL rose to his full height and rendered a slow, deliberate salute, one by one. Other veterans in the crowd followed first the other SEALs, then Marines, then soldiers and airmen. Within seconds, every veteran in attendance was on their feet, saluting. "Revenant 2, someone shouted from the back. "The angel of death who brings us home." My father stood slowly, mechanically, as if pulled by strings. His hand rose to his brow in a salute that looked like it physically hurt him. Beside him, Blake fumbled with his phone, trying to stop recording, his face the color of old paper. "There's more," the admiral announced as the applause died down. "Commander Hale, would you join us?" Mason climbed the stage, carrying something in his hand. "3 weeks ago," Mason said into the microphone, "the members of Echo Team had something made." He held up a challenge coin, larger than most, with an intricate design. On one side, our trident. On the other side, the wings that brought us home. "This is our unit coin now, the one we carry to remember the night we should have died but didn't, because one pilot decided we were worth flying through hell for." He turned to me, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Every SEAL who's served in the last 5 years knows your call sign. We've all heard the stories the pilot who doesn't leave anyone behind. who comes in hot when everyone else waves off. You've pulled out more operators than anyone can count, and most of those rescues are so classified they'll never see daylight." He handed me the coin, then did something I'd never seen him do. He hugged me, right there on stage. "Your father served with honor for 30 years, he whispered in my ear, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "But you're the Harper that warriors pray for when they're pinned down and out of options." When Mason released me and stepped back, I finally looked directly at my family. My mother was crying, her perfect makeup running in streams. Blake had shrunk into his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear into the earth. And my father was still saluting, his arm trembling with the effort, tears rolling down his weathered face. For the first time in my life, Colonel Richard Harper, USN SEAL retired, was looking at me like I was worth seeing. The Admiral returned to the microphone. "Lieutenant Commander Harper will now rejoin the audience for the remainder of our ceremony." I walked off the stage and down the aisle. Every step was measured, controlled, my eyes forward. I could have sat anywhere there were empty seats throughout the crowd. I walked past my family's front row and took a seat in the back. The ceremony continued with my father's Lifetime Achievement Award, but the energy had shifted. When he took the stage to accept his plaque, his prepared remarks forgotten, he said only, "For 30 years. I thought I understood what courage looked like. Today, I learned I'd been looking in the wrong place." Blake never raised his phone again. The live stream for his Warrior Mindset brand had captured something he'd never be able to edit, never be able to spin. It had captured the truth. The ceremony concluded, but nobody moved. The crowd held its breath as my father descended from the stage, his Lifetime Achievement plaque forgotten in his left hand. He walked down the steps like a man in a dream, his eyes searching until they found me in the back row. The entire crowd seemed to turn, watching him make the long walk down the aisle. Blake scrambled to follow, his face still drained of color, while my mother remained frozen in her front row seat. When my father reached me, he stood there for a moment, this decorated SEAL who'd faced enemy fire in 3 different wars, looking lost. Then, in a voice that broke like waves against rocks, he spoke. "For years, we celebrated the wrong kind of discipline. My daughter flew through hell so men like me could come home." The words carried across the silent parade ground. Someone's camera clicked. Blake flinched as if he'd been slapped. "I knew." My father continued, his voice gaining strength. "God help me. I knew. Mason sent me the after-action reports. Tommy Martinez told me how you flew through that SAM site with half your aircraft shot to pieces. I heard the stories from active duty teams about the pilot who never left anyone behind." He paused, swallowing hard. But accepting that meant accepting that my daughter had become what my son couldn't, what I'd convinced myself a woman shouldn't be, so I chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. "Dad," Blake started, reaching for our father's arm. My father turned on him with a fury I'd never seen directed at his golden child. "Apologize to your sister. Now." The command cracked like a whip. Blake's mouth opened and closed, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. The crowd pressed closer, phones out, capturing every second of the Harper family mythology collapsing. Blake stammered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said quietly, finally speaking. "There's a difference." Blake's shoulders sagged. The warrior facade he'd worn like armor for years dissolved, leaving just a frightened man who'd built his entire identity on stolen valor and his sister's silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for the first time since basic training broke him, Blake looked truly defeated. "I'm so fucking sorry, Lena." The profanity made our mother gasp from her seat, but nobody else seemed to notice. They were all watching as a young SEAL stepped forward from the crowd, Tommy Martinez, the one whose life I'd saved that night over the Red Sea. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the weight of reverence. I never got to thank you properly." He pulled out a challenge coin, different from Mason's, and placed it in my hand. "That's my personal coin. Every SEAL makes their own. This one used to say, 'The only easy day was yesterday.' I had it re-engraved." I turned it over. The new inscription read, "September 14th, 2019, the day Revenant 2 gave me tomorrow." Another SEAL stepped forward, then another, each one carrying a coin, each one with a story. The pilot who'd flown through a sandstorm to extract their team, the one who'd taken fire meant for their medevac, the guardian angel they'd prayed for and received. Within minutes, my hands were full of coins, each one representing a life saved, a mission completed, a promise kept. The weight of them was staggering, not the physical weight, but what they represented. My father watched with tears streaming down his face. "How many," he asked Mason, "how many times did she—" "47 confirmed combat rescue missions," Mason replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. 17 under direct fire, shot down twice, crashed 3 times, wounded 4 times, and she never, not once, left anyone behind. My mother had finally risen from her seat, approaching on unsteady legs. "Lena, sweetheart, why didn't you ever tell us?" "I tried," I said simply, "but you were too busy listening to Blake's stories about his 3 weeks in basic to hear about my 3 tours in combat." Blake made a sound like he'd been punched. 3 tours. 4, actually, Mason corrected. "She's heading back next month." The crowd began to disperse, but not before dozens of veterans had shaken my hand, thanked me for services I couldn't discuss, missions that didn't exist, flights that saved lives in places we'd never officially been. As the parade ground emptied, my family stood in a small circle. The dynamics forever shifted. Blake's phone, which had live-streamed everything to his fitness company's followers, had captured his own humiliation, my vindication, and our father's confession. By tomorrow, the video would go viral, the fake warrior exposed by the real one he'd mocked. "Lena," my father said, his voice hoarse, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him, this man who'd been my hero, my tormentor, my impossible standard, and saw him clearly for the first time. Flawed, human, broken by his own prejudices. "I don't need your apology," I said. "I needed your respect, and now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it." I turned to Blake. "Your business is built on a lie. You sell military discipline you never earned, warrior mindset you never developed. That ends today." He nodded, defeated. "I know." "No," I said. "You don't know, but you will. Mason's going to introduce you to some real veterans who need jobs. You're going to hire them as trainers. They'll teach actual discipline, actual mental toughness, and you're going to pay them 60% of your gross. Consider it restitution for stolen valor." 60%! Blake started to protest, then saw my expression and stopped. "Yeah. Okay. Whatever you say." I gathered the challenge coins, each one a testament to nights when I'd chosen others' lives over my own safety. My father's lifetime achievement plaque lay forgotten on a chair, overshadowed by the weight of metal in my hands. "I have to go," I said, checking my watch. "Transport leaves in 3 hours for another mission you'll never hear about." "Lena, wait," my mother called. "When will we see you again?" I paused, considering, when you stop seeing who you wanted me to be and start seeing who I am." As I walked away, I heard my father's voice one more time. "That's my daughter, Lieutenant Commander Lena Harper, the finest pilot I've never deserved to know." The crowd was gone, but his words echoed across the empty parade ground, witnessed by the Pacific sun and the salt wind and the ghosts of every mission I'd flown in silence. My revenge was complete, not in their humiliation, though that had come, not in their tears, though they'd flowed, but in this they would never again be able to diminish what I'd done, who I'd become, what I'd survived. They'd called me Paper Captain. Now they knew I was Revenant too, I left the ceremony grounds with the challenge coins heavy in my pockets, each one clicking against the others with every step a metallic symphony of lives saved and promises kept. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers and the cleanup crew beginning to fold chairs and dismantle the stage where my family's mythology had died. My rental car sat in the California sun, hot to the touch. I placed the coins carefully on the passenger seat, arranging them in rows like soldiers at attention. Tommy Martinez's re-engraved coin went on the dashboard, catching the light, throwing rainbow patterns across the windshield. The drive to the coast took 20 minutes. I needed to see the ocean, needed to feel that vastness that had always made sense when nothing else did. The beach was empty except for a few surfers catching the afternoon waves, their bodies dark silhouettes against the blazing water. I walked to the tide line, my dress whites incongruous against the sand and salt spray. The Pacific stretched endlessly westward, toward places I'd flown over in darkness, toward coordinates that existed only in classified files, toward the wars that never ended even when the news said they had. My phone buzzed, a text from Mason. "Proud of you, kid. Your father just called me. He's broken, but it's the kind of breaking that might let him rebuild into something better." I deleted the message without responding. This wasn't about rebuilding relationships or healing family wounds. This was about truth, delivered with the precision of a Hellfire missile, impossible to deny or deflect. Another text, this one from Blake. "The live stream has 2 million views. My company is finished. I deserve it. I'm sorry." 2 million people had watched Blake's carefully constructed persona crumble. 2 million people had seen my father, the decorated SEAL, admit he'd deliberately ignored his daughter's service to preserve his son's ego. 2 million people had witnessed the moment when pretense met reality and lost. I thought about responding, about offering some kind of absolution or comfort. Instead, I turned off my phone and threw it into the waves. I'd get another one at the base. For now. I wanted silence, not the oppressive silence of family dinners where my truth was unwelcome, but the clean silence of choice. A helicopter passed overhead, a Seahawk like the one I'd flown through that SAM site, like the one I'd fly again in 3 hours. The pilot waggled the aircraft slightly, a greeting between aviators, recognition without words. I raised my hand in response, and the bird continued south, rotors beating their familiar rhythm. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded me of tracer fire, beautiful and deadly, like everything in my world. I pulled out Commander Hale's coin, the one engraved with, "For those who fly through hell so we can walk out," and held it up to the light. My reflection in the polished metal was distorted but recognizable, the face of someone who'd spent years being invisible in plain sight, who'd saved lives in secret while being mocked in public, who'd chosen duty over recognition until recognition was forced upon her. I thought about my mother's tears, genuine but too late, my father's salute, respectful but hollow after years of dismissal, Blake's apology, necessary but insufficient. They'd seen me now. Finally, but only because the spotlight had been too bright to ignore. The waves rolled in, eternal and indifferent. Somewhere beyond that horizon, another mission waited. Another crew would need extraction. Another impossible flight through hostile airspace. Another night when Revenant 2 would dance with death and win. I walked back to my car, sand in my shoes, salt on my lips. The coins on the passenger seat had heated in the sun, warm as blood when I touched them. Each one a story, a life, a night when I'd chosen to fly into hell because someone needed to come home. The engine started smooth and quiet. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed north, toward the air station, toward my next deployment, toward the wars that would never make headlines. In the rearview mirror, the ceremony grounds disappeared, taking with them the last vestiges of who my family thought I was. My phone was gone, sinking into the Pacific with all its unread apologies and too late recognitions. The live stream would continue going viral, the comments section filling with outrage and support and the peculiar cruelty of internet strangers. Blake's business would collapse. My father would struggle with his guilt. My mother would tell revised stories to her friends, trying to reconstruct a narrative where she'd always known, always supported, always believed. None of it mattered. What mattered was the next mission, the next crew that would need extraction, the next impossible flight that everyone would say couldn't be done until I did it. The coastal highway curved inland, toward the base, toward the helicopter that was already being prepped for tonight's mission. My dress whites would be exchanged for a flight suit. The medals would go back in their box, classified and hidden. The challenge coins would travel with me, talismans of nights when death had lost and life had won. At the base gate, the same guard from this morning snapped another salute. "Welcome back, Revenant 2. This time, I returned it properly. Not as the invisible daughter, not as the paper captain, not as the Harper who didn't matter, but as myself, Lieutenant Commander Lena Harper, the pilot who flew through hell so others could walk out. The sun set behind me as I drove onto the base, painting my shadow long and dark across the tarmac. Ahead, the Seahawk waited, rotors still, ready for another dance with darkness. My crew chief was already there, running pre-flight checks, preparing for another mission that wouldn't exist in any official record. I parked the car and sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see the horizon where sky met sea, that liminal space where anything was possible, where a helicopter could disappear into classified airspace and emerge carrying souls back from the edge of extinction. My family had their truth now. Blake had his humiliation. My father had his regret. My mother had her tears. And I had what I'd always had: the sky, the mission, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone was praying for extraction, for salvation, for Revenant 2 to come calling. I grabbed my flight bag from the trunk, leaving the dress whites and the medals and the complicated weight of family behind. The challenge coins went into my flight suit pockets, their weight familiar and comforting. Time to fly. Time to disappear into the classified night. Time to be what I'd always been, with or without their recognition, the ghost who brings people home. The shadow with rotors. The one they call when dying seems certain, but death is not acceptable. My revenge was complete, delivered not in anger, but in truth, witnessed by hundreds and viewed by millions. They used to laugh at my silence. Now it's the sound they'll never forget. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear what you thought about Lena's journey and her moment of vindication.